I did some testing with quantum drives and had some very enlightening discoveries. I found that there was not a clear best choice that everyone should get when upgrading this component. So this week, I'm going to take you on a deep dive into quantum drives and examine some of the differences beyond just the type, like industrial, civilian, and military. We're going to take a look at the various grades and manufacturers and try to really see where CIG is going with quantum drives. I'm going to be using the 315P as my test ship. It's a nice little multi-purpose ship capable of some transport and light fighting, but I'm probably going to use this ship for delivery missions, light cargo trading, and just getting from point A to point B with a small convenient ship. I purchased several different quantum drives and ran them all against the same kind of test. The characteristics I wanted to look at were: how much fuel does it consume? How fast does it get me from point A to point B? What is its spool up time? And what does it cost me in repairs and maintenance? There were a couple other things that I'll bring in later during the video, but these were the main focus. The quantum drive that comes with the 315P is called the Goliath, made by StarWorks. It's a Class C industrial component. This was going to be my baseline for a lot of the other quantum drive comparisons. So here's the run I used. I was going to set my quantum destination from Port Olisar to ArcCorp. Whatever fuel it took to get there, and how long it took to take that one-way journey was what I was going to record as fuel consumption and travel time, in addition to the spool-up time. I was going to travel straight back to Port Olisar and repair the ship in an attempt to take a measure of what its maintenance costs might be. Right now, maintenance is pretty cheap. It really isn't a significant factor in your operating costs of your ship, but I was curious if there were any significant differences in just that relative cost. I suppose we could say the same thing about a lot of the other numbers. Those things will continue to change and get rebalanced, but the overall intent of whether one kind of drive performs better than another kind of drive in some way may not radically change. So what did we get from the Goliath? It required about 245 quantum fuel, had a spool-up time of 11.3 seconds, and made the trip in 10 minutes 45 seconds. When I got back to Olisar, the repair bill was 9 alpha UEC. First thing I wanted right out of the gate, I wanted to compare the Class C industrial component against a Class B industrial component, one grade higher and supposedly better. To keep things on an even keel, I was fortunate enough to find another component made by StarWorks, the Colossus. That was a Class B industrial. So let's see if there was any improvements between classes and where those improvements were. The Colossus required less fuel. Not a lot less, but a little bit, about 232. The spool-up time was about the same at 11.1 seconds. Really, differences like that, I was just discounting to human error, which is me.
It's me.
Its travel time was also a little improved at 10 minutes flat. I had a slightly higher repair of 11 alpha UEC. I tried to be very careful about use of my thrusters, how I landed the ship, and trying to replicate my actions with each one of the tests the same way, so that the majority of any wear and tear might fall predominantly on the quantum drive from going round trip. But I was still pretty unsure how much merit I could put into this repair number, particularly because any wear and tear on components aren't showing up in the ships right now. So what was next? The EOS civilian class drive made by RSI. We can see that it required significantly more fuel just being a civilian component, but the spool-up time at 7.4 seconds and the travel time at 8 minutes was a significant reduction. So there was a performance improvement on the civilian component at the cost of more fuel. Now, this is being a test specifically for the 315P and what I wanted to do with it. I was a little disheartened that I would not be able to make a round-trip journey from Port Olisar to ArcCorp and back on a single tank of fuel. If my intention was to go to one of the ArcCorp moons and deliver something or pick up some trade goods, I would have to stop at one of the rest stops to refuel. that refueling would probably take longer than the travel time the quantum drive was actually saving me. So that was a little disappointing, and I wasn't able to collect any information about repairs because those extra actions of having to refuel at a rest stop and get back to Port Olisar really just interfered with that repair number. Now came a really interesting test, and one I've only heard alluded to by CIG, and that was a difference in the manufacturers. At this point, I was getting a little pogged up at this testing. I mean, it was a little exciting to start to see some of the differences and know exactly where those differences were and how much. In this next test, I went with our ArcCorp brand Civilian C drive called Rush. It was the same civilian type and class, with the only difference being who made it, so this was going to be interesting. It turned out that this Rush drive took a lot more fuel than the RSI brand, and had about the same spool up time. But it did shave a little bit of time off the travel. So there was a difference, and a significant one, between the different manufacturers of the same component. I found this to be extremely cool, and it made me understand that I might have to try out different manufacturers of a given component, whether it be a quantum drive, cooler, or whatever, in order to really know how it was going to perform for me. But here I had the same issue with the civilian drive from ArcCorp that I had with the RSI drive. I couldn't make a round-trip journey across the solar system and back with this drive.
It's only 900 miles there and 900 miles back.
This, however, was related to the 315P and its fuel capacity. In a different ship with a different amount of fuel it could carry, these civilian drives might be capable of doing what I wanted. So what about the military component? I had come into this test with some knowledge knowing that the military components typically had the highest performance, so my expectation was that it would get me from point A to point B much faster.
Are we really going 110? We're going 110.
But probably at the cost of more fuel. But exactly how much fuel was the question. I was actually very excited about this military component, and like I said at the beginning, I had thought this would likely wind up being my component of choice for this ship. But here's where the military type fell completely flat for me. I couldn't even get from Port Olisar out to ArcCorp on a single tank of gas.
How do you expect us to get it there? Drag it!
I would have to stop once on the way and refuel. That was completely unacceptable for how I was going to be using this ship. Now, to be fair to the military component, if I wanted to respond to combat assist missions and jump short distances very quickly, then this might be a perfectly good component. And there are some aspects about these components, such as their resistance to distortion weapons, or perhaps their resistance to quantum interdiction or EMP, that I wasn't able to easily test, and could be important factors, maybe even for transport activities. But the fact that I couldn't even go the distance was just a killer for me. So this one was going to be left on the shelf for use, at least with the 315P. Lastly, I had to look at a stealth quantum drive. All the other components on the 315P were stealth. The coolers, the power plant, the shield generators. So I was interested to see what a stealth quantum drive might do in this ship. And if it performed well, maybe being a little more stealthy while in quantum travel could be beneficial against pirate interdictions in the future. But alas, this Drift Class C stealth drive from Ramp fell short, just like the military drive. It was just shy of being able to make the jump from Port Olisar to ArcCorp. It was more fuel efficient than the military version, but still not quite enough. From what I'd seen so far, a better class stealth component, or maybe one from another manufacturer, might do better. So I'm not counting it out entirely, but I think even in a best case scenario, I'm stuck with having to refuel at ArcCorp to get back. Now, to be clear about this whole fuel consumption thing, it's not so much the cost of the fuel that was an issue for me.
That is more than just a tanker of gas.
Although quantum fuel could be more expensive later, it was more about the fact that it couldn't go the distance on a very common jump that I'd be wanting to do over and over again in the universe. So there you have it. Not only are there differences between the different types of drive, which is somewhat well known, But there are indeed differences between the grades of component, and perhaps even more significant differences between the manufacturers. That last bit of information I thought was the most revealing. I hadn't expected to find major differences like that. The other bit of enlightenment here was that there is not a clear meta for what is the best component. It clearly depends on the ship and what you intend to do with the ship. I really like this, and it sounded like it was playing out like CIG intended. I don't like it when there's just one go-to thing that everyone gravitates towards. It brings some good variety and interest into the gameplay and these kinds of customizations when one of the primary factors is the player themselves. I hope you like this video. Feel free to like and subscribe, use my referral code if you want to, and I'll be talking to you later.
Landing complete. Have a pleasant stay.